Hello, welcome indeed to Knitting Matters. Who'd have thought it? We're on season 3 and this is episode 1 of season 3. So welcome indeed. Welcome if you've watched us before, and a special welcome to if you're new to Knitting Matters. Let me just see if I can see you coming up on my Facebook page. If not, I'll leave it and my camera man will hopefully tell me when you pop up. And if I can see your name, I'll say hello. But forgive me if I miss you. Okay, I do want to know if you can hear me. I'm assuming that you can, unless you tell me otherwise, in which case I'll just keep going. So thank you so much for taking the time to join me, whether you're watching live now. And I can see that Marie has joined us, and Tina, thank you so much. Hi there. So my name is Cheryl Lampard. I'm an image consultant with my company Style Matters International. And throughout my life, I've had 2 passions, sewing and knitting. And knitting is my therapy, as I know it is for a lot of you. Knitting is the thing that I love to do every day. I'm a knitting educator with the Craft Yarn Council, a certified instructor with them. And many moons ago, I had a yarn store in the United Kingdom, which I loved. And one of the great joys of having a yarn store is that you got to teach people how to knit. I loved doing it then, and I love doing it now. So welcome indeed. Before we start, I hope you like the banner on the Knitting Matters Facebook page of the sheep, where I put little sort of speech bubbles. Those are photos from my recent vacation in the UK, and in particular the sheep on the Gower Peninsula in South Wales, and it's so beautiful there. I've taken lots of sheepy photos, and I'll be sharing them with you as we go along in the weeks to come. Anyway, it's beautiful there. So on to today's topic, which is Armenian knitting. I'm going to ask the camera to move. I see a few other people have joined us. I think Kate and Kimberly, welcome indeed. Okay, so Armenian knitting is today's topic, but what actually is it? Let me show you this printout because this is a bit of knitting history and it will help to explain a few things. Elsa Schiaparelli's famous bow knot sweater from her November 1927 collection is probably the best example. Unfortunately, I don't have one of the sweaters. They're in museums across the world these days. But when the Philadelphia Museum of Art staged a retrospective of Schiaparelli's work in 2004, knitting experts and authors Meg Swanson and Joyce Williams were tasked with reproducing a knitting kit of the sweater to sell in the gift shop of the museum. Now, examining it, they expected it to be intarsia, the intarsia technique, but they were surprised to find that it was knitted throughout with 2 strands of yarn, and the yarn was effectively sort of trapped every few stitches. Hi Anne, thanks for joining us. If you want a recap on intarsia, that's from season 1, episode 6, our intro to intarsia. Anyway, back to the bow knot sweater. Apparently Elsa Schiaparelli had seen a garment made in this way and thought it was a very interesting way to do a piece of knitting. So she tracked down the knitter, who happened to be an Armenian lady, and this lady ultimately knit the original sweaters for the designer. As more garments were sold, Armenian knitters in Paris who knew the technique were recruited to knit them. And from these knitters, the technique got its name. So this is a photograph, obviously, of the sweater. And Sheila, thanks for joining us. But you can see here, it's a bit grainy, but that's actually a sort of tweedy effect here. And that's produced by the knitting method. So it becomes a design detail. And I'll show you a bit more about that in this sample. Let me move that out the way. So I have knitted this in the same way, or the same technique. Now, granted, it would benefit a little bit from blocking, but it is what it is at the moment. So other than this rib, which is just single, a double knit weight, I mean, but it's just 1 thread. I've then gone on to 2 colours in the way that you would expect for Fair Isle, if you will. Just 2-stranded knitting. You know, my first stitch is blue, my second is grey, and so on and so on. And that's very typical of Fair Isle. So you can see there, it's stranded there. Now, when we get to this grey solid, and I can see that Dawn has just joined us. Hi there, thanks for joining. when we get to this grey solid, it's actually not just one colour. This is all stranded in some way. You can see it there at the back too. So the first few rows were typical of fair art. Now I've carried the yarn across and trapped it every few stitches. But on the front, it looks like a solid colour. You can, if I pull that apart, you can see that slightly tweedy look with the second colour coming through at the back. I really quite like that effect. You almost create well, you do create a texture. But I particularly like that, and that's what was featured. That's what was so fascinating about the bow knot sweater. Somebody else has joined me here. I can't quite see their name. Oh, Leslie and Deborah. Hi. Now, then I've changed it to the solid colour for the little hearts here that I've gone all round here. Now, this is where you might ordinarily expect to switch to intarsia, where you have, you know, a spool of yarn here for the grey or whatever your main colour is. Then you change it to your block of colour and then another spool. Well, you can get round that by doing it this way. Again, if I show you the inside, you'll see that you can just see the sort of outline of my heart there. I've stranded my yarn again all through the hearts. So we've got, the whole thing is done with two colours, but you only see the colour when I want you to see it. But it will make more sense when we go along. But this, in essence, is Armenian knitting. So what you end up with is a very warm fabric because you've got two thicknesses of yarn. You get this nice tweedy looking appearance, which I think is very attractive. And you do get a firm fabric, so you're not going to get much elasticity. The only elasticity here is in the rib, but you're not going to get much here. And in fact, I know here, I'll come to that in a second actually, here it's a little bit tighter. Where I started off, because I haven't done this for a while, my tension was a bit tighter. So it's one of these things that's very important to do a gauge swatch, because you will probably find your gauge is different. As I sort of relaxed into the rhythm of the knitting, and you do get into a rhythm here, you'll probably find your gauge is different. For most people, Armenian knitting, you get a slightly different gauge. I started off really quite tight, and then I actually got a bit larger. So you do, if you're making a garment or anything that needs to be a certain size, you really do need to check your gauge sample. Okay, so remember, you're going to get a warm fabric. Oh, Deborah's joined. Sorry, I said hello to Deborah before. Claire Jackson is watching. Thanks for joining us. So it's warm. You've got a double yarn thickness. You get that tweedy appearance, firm fabric, not much stretch, and you need to do the gauge sample. So now to the important bit. How do we actually do it? Now, we're going to take some time over this because it's not a difficult technique, but it takes a little bit of practice. So Armenian knitting can certainly be done flat, but that actually means you're going to be purling on the wrong side rows. And now, if you've never tried this technique before, it's much, much easier to do it in the round. So I would suggest, even if you don't normally knit in the round, I would suggest trying it in the round first to get the hang of it. That means we are only doing knit stitches, so that's going to be easier to start off with. Maybe we'll do Armenian knitting in the flat where we do purling another time. But for today, I'm going to show you what I consider to be the easiest way. And I really do encourage you to try, because it is much easier to do it in the round. You're only going to be working with knit stitches, and we're just going to keep on going round until we get into some rhythm. So I'm going to show you what we do, because it does take a while to get the hang of. I would also suggest that you use either DPNs, double pointed needles, or circular needles of the right size. Now, I didn't have, when I did this sample, I didn't have a small enough circular needle to hand. Most of my knitting tools are still in storage at the moment. So I actually used a longer needle, a longer cable, a longer circular needle, and the magic loop method. Now, I will say I love magic loop, but I don't recommend doing that as a first time if you're trying out Armenian knitting, because there's a lot going on. I found it a bit awkward. It didn't help with my gauge, and most importantly, because you're sliding the needles up one end and moving it round, it kind of interrupted my knitting rhythm. And you do get into a really nice pattern of rhythm with this. Holly has joined us. Hi, Holly. So let me show you. I do love the colour combination here. This green and kind of plum colour reminds me of sort of flowers, certain flower. I can't think what it is now, but I love the combo. Anyway, there are some designs, some patterns recommend trapping the floats every second stitch. If that's what your pattern says to do, then do it. I didn't do that here, but what you do get if you do that is you don't get any visible floats. You get a really nice sort of evenly woven back of fabric. I didn't do that here because I figured that's kind of a bit too much at the moment if you're learning this technique. But if your pattern asks you to do that, there's probably a reason for it. But the principle is the same. So let me just show you here. On the right side, it just looks like ordinary stocking stitch, ordinary knit stitch every round. On the reverse side, what I've done here, I played about with this. I think it forms a really nice pattern on its own. For the first few rows, I trapped every third stitch. So I would knit 2 stitches, then trap my coloured yarn for the third stitch. And that's the first few rows I did like that. So you actually get a really pretty pattern. Then I moved up a bit and in terms of did it every 4th stitch. So I knitted 3 stitches, trapped on the 4th stitch. And that's what I'm going to show you now. That's what I'm going to demo now. Just because I think it's a sort of fairly, it's just something that you knitters tend to do if we're doing fair isle. And this is a great, the two-handed technique is great for fair isle. We're sort of trapping every 3rd stitch maybe. I don't like long floats. I always sort of like to twist or trap certainly every 4th stitch. I really don't like long floats because you can catch fingers and rings and whatever in those. Anyway, so we're going to be trapping every 4th stitch, but if you have a particular pattern, then do what it says. So I'm going to work two-handed. I'm going to have my my solid colour, my main colour in my right hand. We're going to be trapping the left hand colour for this first few stitches. So the darker colour is going to be in my left hand. Now, the way I like to do this is I just kind of run it through my finger and then loop it around my little finger to get a little bit of tension. Otherwise, a bit like sort of crocheting really, but I want that sort of right towards the tips of the needles. Some people find they prefer to raise the yarn, if you will, with their middle finger. I like to do it with the forefinger. That said, sometimes I find myself doing this without realizing it. Anyway, I'm going to kind of keep it to my index finger at the moment. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to show you how to trap the yarn, the left-hand color yarn. I've got to say at first, when you try this, it's going to feel really funny, but please stick with it. It's like everything else, it needs practice. So the tip of the right-hand needle goes in there. Now I'm going to lift that and rest it across the V's of the needle, okay? Now I'm going to trap it by throwing my yarn round as I ordinarily would. And now we're going to move that back. We are not knitting the coloured yarn. So there it is, sitting nicely there. It's not actually locked until I do the next stitch. Now it's locked. It's not going anywhere. I'm going to show that to you several more times so you can see. So I'm going to knit 3 more ordinary, 1, 2, 3 with my light colour, in this case my green yarn. You can see now this yarn is just hanging about there at the back. Let me just give myself a little bit more tension there. Now I'm going to trap it again. So the tips of my needles, as if I'm going to knit another stitch, but before I wrap the needle with my green yarn, I bring the plum yarn across between those V's. Now I wrap, But I don't pull that through now, because if I did, I'm going to get the plum yarn as a stitch, and I don't want that. I'm literally just wrapping it. I'm catching it. Now I bring that back and I finish my stitch. That's not fully trapped until I do the next stitch. Now, whoops, now it is. Okay, it's trapped there as it was there. Let me do a few more. So 1, I'm trapping every 4th. Hi Kathy, thanks for joining. 3 stitches, and I'm trapping on the 4th. I'm putting my needles, the tips of my needles together as if I'm about to do a stitch. Then I bring this up with my left hand, I wrap, and I bring that back. Okay, so your darker colour yarn is always going to be at the top. It's always going to be above the yarn that's in the right hand. Now it's trapped, it's not going anywhere. 1, 2, 3. I'm about to bring my yarn across into the V's, wrap, bring that back down, knit the stitch as before. Oops, I've split my yarn, and now that, split the yarn again. Now it's locked. I'm just going to keep doing this, and you can see what I'm doing then. So I've got to do, where did I trap it? 2 more stitches. 1, 2, 3. Did I do? Yeah, 3. In there, bring that over, wrap, bring that back, down, and trap it. So you can see as we go along, that's being trapped every 4th stitch. Where was I? Yeah, 1, 2, 3. Get more yarn. Needles together as if to knit. Bring that forward. Wrap. This is the point that people forget when they're beginners. You want to do this, and if you do that, you're going to get both colours. That's not what we do. You're just resting that in that V. You're wrapping, then you're letting that go, and now that locks it with that stitch. One more, and then I'll show you how to do the other colour, trapping the other colour. 1, 2, lost my plum thread, 2, 3, as if to knit a stitch, I bring that finger forward with that colour yarn, bring that over, bring that back. So what you're doing effectively is creating, you're allowing this yarn to be brought up and trapped. So what would happen if I didn't do that? Well, then I've got to sort of drop the yarn. If I didn't do that, I've got to twist my yarn. I've got to, trap it some other way. This is so much more efficient. You get a much more even fabric, and you don't have to, you're not untangling your yarns. When I started doing fair isle, 100 years ago, when I first had a crack at fair isle, I had, although you're only doing 2 colours generally per row, I was getting my yarn so twisted up and dropping one, picking up the other. You'd never get a nice even tension. You do with this. It's so much better. It does take a while to get used to. Continental knitters will find this a lot easier because you're using the yarn in your left hand, but there's something really nice about two-handed knitting. You do get into a lovely rhythm. One more go, and then I'll show you how to bring in the other colour. Okay, so that forward, wrap, drop, off, and this is the stitch that locks it. Let me just show you. So we've done this along here. That's where it's locked. This is where it floats. This is where it's locked. This is where it floats along. So you're always going to get the colour that's in the left hand. In essence, that's the dominant colour but this is one that's always going to stay above the other colour. So that's why you get this really nice, neat patterning at the back. It's almost, the back is almost as nice as the front. Jane Etherington, thank you so much for joining. So lovely to see you. Wonderful. And Sandra, nice to see you too. Thank you for joining us. Okay, I'm going to show you now. And I would say you just keep practicing that. Just keep going around and practicing that for as long as you like. As I say, it feels so awkward at first. Continental knitters often fare better because they hold the yarn in the left hand anyway. It does take a while, especially if you're only ever use the English method of knitting, if you're a thrower, as I am. The first time I ever did this Armenian knitting, I held on to my left-hand yarn as if my life depended on it. And my knitting ended up so puckered, it was like one of those sort of Chesterfield sofas with all the, you know, the buttons pulled through. I was hopeless when I first started, but I promise you it comes. It does come. Let me just get my yarn sorted around this hand again. Right, let's look now about how we trap the right-hand colour. And just to refresh your memory, let's say I'm doing a block of colour. I'm referring to this sample again now because I'm not going to do a heart shape. I'm just going to do a block of colour. But I need to now, although I'm going to do the colour with the left hand yarn, this is the yarn that I need to trap my right hand yarn. And this is done slightly differently, but I'm doing a block of colour. I will just do a square or something. So again, I'm going to insert my needle in the same way as if I'm to knit. I'm going to wrap my right hand needle around as if to knit. I'm going to wrap the left hand now as if to knit. Then I'm going to unwrap the right hand. Okay. And I've got the contrast colour on my needle. I'm going to do a few stitches and then I'm going to do exactly the same thing again. One of the things you need to remember to do in this instance is to wrap your left hand colour the same direction as this, because the temptation is to do this, and if you do that you're going to seat your, if you do that you're going to find your stitch is seated the wrong way. That's not the end of the world, you can fix it, but let's not give ourselves any more problems than we need to. So I'm going to go this way round, which at first seems very alien to throwers, but we're working from the yarn in our left hand. So I've done 3 stitches there. I'm going to trap my right hand yarn again. So this one, some people find this easier because it sort of is the natural flow. So I'm wrapping as if to knit. I'm also going to wrap that one as if to knit in the same direction. Now I unwrap it and I bring that through. Okay. And this, when you do these blocks of colour like this is kind of nice to, this is where you can practice just wrapping your left hand yarn the opposite direction. As I say, it's really not the end of the world if you wrap it the other way round. You're going to find when you come back to knit that again on the next row, you're going to find it seated the wrong way, like that would be. So that stitch is seated the wrong way, and you can see that there. You can see that there. So if I came around on the next row to knit that, I would have to just reseat that or put it back like that. So you could just reseat it or knit into the back of it. But let's not, why give ourselves more hassle than we need to? Now I'm going to go back to my other colour. I'm going to trap my other colour. I'm going to go back to my green. Oh, I've left that. Okay, no, I've still got, okay, 3 stitches. I'm going to go to my green, so sorry, do that again. I'm going back to my green, and I'm wrapping my plum colour. I'm locking, I'm going to do a few more stitches there, then I'm going to do that again, wrap, down. How many did I do? Let's make it 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Let's do the same. 3, 4, 5, 6. Oh, that's perfect. That gives me. Now I'm going to change to my plum colour again, as if to knit. I wrap my yarn, I wrap the plum colour, I unwrap the green, or I unwrap what's in my right hand. Now I'm going to do a few stitches because I don't need to wrap until my 4th stitch. I'm going to do, okay, now I need to do this again because I want to trap this yarn, I want to trap this float, wrap, wrap, unwrap, through, and just a couple more that way. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Yeah, there we go. So that's how you do left hand and right hand. On the back you can see the float is going there, the float's going there. It's going to be under. The right hand is always going to be, the right hand thread is always going to be under the left hand thread. But that's the basis of Armenian knitting. But the joy of this is that you can use this two-handed method. So we're doing 2 things here actually. We're learning two-handed knitting and we're learning Armenian knitting. So a couple of things to remember. Although we're trapping the floats every 4th stitch, let me just go back to this one. We're trapping the floats every 4th stitch. On the next row, don't trap in the same place. You would trap in the middle, so the 2nd stitch of the 3 knit stitches, if that makes sense. Because otherwise you're going to get a ridge. You're going to get, in the same way as if you always trap your float with ferrule in the same place, you're going to get, you know, a kind of a gap or a ridge. It's obvious where you've trapped the floats. You can't but help that. So you're going to be trapping them. Let me show you where I did up here. Yeah. You're trapping them every 2nd stitch of the 3rd. No, the alternate row you're trapping in the middle. So you're not trapping in the same place. And then the next row you can trap in the same as the 1st row, if that makes sense. That's how you end up with these really kind of pretty patterns, because you're trapping in different places. But it's consistent. It's completely consistent. So the back often looks as good as the front. But don't just, even if you trap on the 1st and the 3rd or whatever, until you get the hang of it, just pace your trapping, if you like. The other thing is, if you are working blocks of colour, the motif at some point will throw out your lovely rhythmic mode of knit 3, trap 1. It really doesn't matter. Just continue with it on the other side of the motif. You know, sometimes here, because this is sort of shaped, I was trapping here, then there was 2 stitches and I had to trap again, and so on. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. You can just carry on once you get to the other side of the motif. The important thing is that you trap the floats, you're locking the floats in. As with so many things in knitting, there are other ways to hold the yarn. You can hold both strands in the right hand. Continental knitters often hold both strands in the left hand. I love this two-handed knitting method, and I wanted to get you going with Armenian knitting, and it seems to just be the easiest way to start off with. But you may find that you prefer a different method. If you do, that's just fine. It's just adding more sort of information and tools to your toolbox. And as I say, I never do ferrule now without using the two-handed technique. When I discovered how to do ferrule with a two-handed technique, it was like, oh, why have I not known this before? It just comes out so lovely and even, and it's really nice to do. Anyway, I love this technique. I really hope you do too. I hope you've enjoyed that. If you have any questions, feel free to put them in the comments box, and I will answer them as soon as I can afterwards, or certainly within the next 24 hours when I upload the video, I upload the replay. So I'm going to ask the camera to come back to me. So I hope you found that fun to start off Season 3. I still can't believe we're in season 3. That's our 3rd year of Knit and Matters. All thanks to you for watching. I do appreciate it. So, as always, this episode and others will be uploaded to a Facebook page and our YouTube channel, Knit and Matters YouTube channel, within 24 hours. If you're looking for this one again, or you need it to recap, it's season 3, episode 1. Hard to forget that one. So, I hope you enjoyed that. Don't forget, anytime, just ping me a question. Always happy to answer it. And if it's a question that you want to ask me, others might have the same question to ask as well. So you can either private message me, or better still, put it on the Knit and Matters page, then everyone can see it and I can answer it to everyone. So thank you for joining me. Really appreciate you doing that. Until next time, stay well, stay safe, and stay knitting. Bye for now.